In a heartbreaking and hopeful moment, a mother wolf fell directly in front of a peaceful. Everyone was moved to tears by her baby's intervention in the house. Life was going as usual on a typical day in a tiny, quiet town, until a remarkable incident occurred that would alter the lives of those who saw it forever at the beginning of. At dawn, a gentle glow crept through the woods, and a bustle arose close to a small, ancient home at the edge of the woodland. The terrible sight of a mother wolf, regal and protective, collapsing directly in front of their neighbors shocked them. It was as though nature itself had stopped in front of the house to display a moment of bare vulnerability where even the mother wolf had long been a representation of the wild. But even the most vicious animals may give victim to overwhelming weakness. Beast whose instincts for protection kept her pack secure and whose commanding presence demanded respect. But on that, something went horribly wrong that fateful morning, and Miss fell, barely conscious, as she lay. Her eyelids were fluttering feebly on the dewy grass, seemingly begging for assistance, and the suddenness of her collapse shot shock through. Ripples through the spectators as neighbors hurried outside to witness what had transpired. Whispers and gasps filled the air. As the commotion unfolded, a small, inconspicuous figure, a newborn wolf, came out of the shadows. Small and shaky but full of unwavering resolve, the cub naturally avoided running away in terror. In a heartbreaking and incredibly poignant moment, the newborn wolf came up to its fallen mother and started to push its mother with soft, frantic licks, as in an attempt to reawaken the dwindling light of life within her. Hearts were won over by the cub's actions, which were so pure and full of love. Tears fell from the eyes of all those in attendance, not simply out of. This act of filial devotion produced a great sense of optimism in addition to sadness, and the occurrence swiftly spread through the neighborhood, affecting everyone from locals to wildlife specialists, while some were initially devastated by the untimely death of a creature so essential to the environment. Others took comfort in the little cub's bravery serves as a reminder that nature is there even in the worst of circumstances. It has the capacity to uplift and heal as first responders and animal. When welfare organizations got on the site, a rescue plan was promptly put into action. The mother and give her the much-needed care. This film reveals the breathtaking series of events that started with a single act of brutality from nature and was changed by a baby wolf's courageous and kind deeds. It's a tale that cuts across the lines between tragedy and optimism, providing insight into the deep connections that bind everyone. Early on that fateful morning, in the peaceful suburban serenity, living things was disturbed by a sudden disturbance at the edge of the forest next to a small family house as dawn slipped in and when the countryside was initially softly illuminated by the sun, a number of neighbors saw an odd figure reclining. They found the dewy grass to be still as it approached with cautious trepidation, because it was a magnificent mother wolf, not a stray pet, who had previously been the strong protector of her group, now fell and, exposed in front of their eyes. The scene was bizarre and sharp contrast. With the untamed might and delicate vulnerability of nature, the mother wolf is known as wander these forests with authority and grace. She lay splayed on the ground, her eyes tired and her breathing shallow. Normally alive and aware, she fluttered feebly as though she was struggling to hold onto consciousness, which was the reason behind her fall. Was unclear at first, and some hypothesis that it might have been a sudden sickness or long-term fatigue. Voyage. But as the seriousness of the situation took over, some murmured about the harsh reality of the nature. A small figure of a young wolf appeared in the most heartbreaking section of the scene from the shadows of the trees. Only a few months old, with silky, undamaged fur and big, naive eyes that are both terrified and, rather of running away in fear, the cub cautiously went towards its fallen mother. The scene was both. With tiny trembling movements, the newborn wolf started nudging its mother first, which was either heartbreaking or inspirational, with soft licks over her flank, followed by more forceful licks as though attempting to rouse her from the edge of unconsciousness. The cub's neighbors and bystanders, who had assembled in a silent circle, watched in disbelief as As the gentle movements transpired, it seemed as though the small creature had an unwavering. The baby's gentle whimpers and the cautious manner it rubbed its nose against its mother's skin demonstrated its determination to protect the one it loved. Fur was a symbol of hope, a subtle appeal for life, and evidence of the strength of familial ties. Several people in attendance were overtaken with emotion, their eyes welling with tears, when they observed a picture that perfectly captured the harshness of nature as well as its tenderness. While, through the local wildlife and community animal welfare professionals, word of the occurrence circulated swiftly. Emergency personnel cautiously approached the pair, keeping in mind the wild, as rehabilitators raced to the scene. Stabilizing the damaged mother's instincts and the cub's fragile condition was their top goal. The mother wolf making sure she was taken to a wildlife rehabilitation facility safely. Center for urgent care, while maintaining the priceless relationship between cub and his mother. The rescuer's cow's measured methods stood in sharp contrast to the roar of the spectators' impromptu emotions. It was evident that every minute mattered, and the mother's delicate condition required urgent care to stop additional. While at the scene while the rescuers were working, a number of witnesses described what they observed. An old neighbor who had long been captivated by the area wildlife's legends whispering that the mother, I had previously seen her, and she commented, Wolf has always been a symbol of strength for the community. With a proud, quiet prowl, it seems as though a piece of the wild has been broken. Seeing her like way at dusk, while fiercely directing her group. Her remarks struck a profound chord with many people, emphasizing the emotional toll of seeing nature's power diminish too. The baby wolf's predicament was considerably more vulnerable because of their helplessness. Cub, who was still unfamiliar with the harsh realities of living in the wild, appeared to realize instinctively that its mother was in difficulty since it followed the rescuers closely, nuzzling them every now and again for assurance revealed a great deal about its bond and natural need for caring in. At that time, the tiny wolf transformed into a potent representation of hope and a living reminder that despite, during that day, tragedy, the flame of life could spark change as the injured. The community stayed behind as the mother was delicately loaded into a transport truck and driven to specialized treatment. Engrossed in the drama that was developing, having passionate and hushed chats, many others shared their sincere condolences on social media and in local news sources, stating that they had been deeply moved by Cub's courageous action, and the tale was developing beyond a straightforward act of rescue. Jack, a local hiker, is defining the natural environment with his story of love, tenacity, and the unbreakable relationships that had been one of the first to see the scene and started recording everything in his journal, including the infant wolf's shaky motions in response to its mother's tender, urgent licks were captured with the hope that this tale could encourage people to get past appearances and see the deep beauty in acts of. After that heartbreaking morning, rescuers showed compassion by carefully transferring the injured mother wolf to the story of her and her baby's extraordinary attachment took on a deeper meaning at Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. Already moved by the heartwarming sight, the community turned its attention to the infant wolf's position as the young cub whose, while professionals attempted to stabilize the mother local, innate compassion had shone through during the tragedy. Compassionate volunteers and wildlife rehabilitators made it their goal to make sure the cub wouldn't be apart from her. Their intention was to maintain the deep bond that had developed in front of everyone's eyes. Animal specialists kept an eye on the mother's health and the behavior of the young wolf over the next few days. The cub, whom people came to refer to as Hope, displayed remarkable fortitude in spite of her own youth and frailty. Hope seemed to recognize the seriousness of the situation. She would frequently curl up nearby while her mother was being attended to. She acted in a discreet manner next to the shelter where rescuers had temporarily cared for the injured animal. Steadfast devotion that touched everyone who saw her. Wildlife experts clarified that the kinship in wolf packs is essential for survival between mother and child, yet it is rarely seen by people in such an open manner. Hope's gentle motions, a tender nuzzle, a cautious lick, or just maintaining a cozy distance, talked about a strong emotional bond that went beyond the untamed local news's natural instincts. As word of Hope's devotion went around the neighborhood, social media was overflowing with pictures. Video footage of the newborn wolf that drove many viewers to tears because of her silent request for her mother's healing. People related their own experiences of loss and the restorative value of empathy. Hope's story, and her mother's came to, represent the possibility of rebirth in even the most dire situations, while at the wildlife. Devoted carers at the rehabilitation center put in endless hours to help the mother wolf recover while Dr. Rivera, the center's head, made sure that Hope remained a consistent source of solace and company. Although the mother's illness was severe, the veterinarian observed that the presence of her youngster seemed to have a pleasant, soothing impact on her. In many animals, the relationship between a parent and seeing her cub by her side, she continued, is essential to her recovery. Showing such unwavering love might cause a healing reaction in her body as well as her emotions. Observations provided scientific evidence that Hope's behavior was not merely instinctive, but rather carried an emotional depth that could perhaps aid in recovery as community members' rehabilitation progresses. Arrange fundraisers and vigils to aid the center's initiatives, and local schools were moved by the tale. Conversations about protecting wildlife and the value of compassion for all living things. These gatherings not only generated much-needed money, but also turned a devastating event into a rallying cry for change and comprehension. However, there were some difficulties with the delicate. Given the nature of wildlife care, it would be dangerous to keep her away from her sick mother for an extended amount of time. Dismantling the connection that had been so important to their mental health, animal welfare specialists warned that any choice to move or care for one without the other would need to be carefully considered because it would disturb this logistical and ethical relationship could result in more stress or possibly long-term behavioral problems. Problem made the situation more complicated, requiring rescuers and community leaders should balance the necessity of maintaining this with the urgent need for medical help. Reactions to the community's extraordinary bond were divided, with many. Some skeptics were impressed by Hope's act of loyalty and wondered if the emotional story being told was accurate. One local resident said that it was an idealization of a natural process. Animals will always follow their inclinations. They do this when they're under stress. But for most people, Hope's story was more than just an explanation of instinct. Hope persisted, which was evidence of the transformational power of treatment. Her presence at her mother's side acted as a reminder that kindness may reconcile the stark cruelty of nature and the restorative power of human compassion at a peaceful moment. As Hope tenderly nuzzled her mother's side at the rehabilitation facility, a volunteer, called Lisa, whispered to a "Look at her" coworker. She seems to be saying, "Don't give up, Mama. I'm here." And her statements perfectly encapsulated what many people in the community had come to. We're going to get through this together. Think that this was a tale of an unshakable friendship rather than just survival that can encourage recovery outside of the forest. In his own journal, Jack, one of the first people to observe the site, wrote a great deal on the experience's emotional impact, how the newborn wolf's tender actions had reignited a life in that hour of despair. Long-forgotten faith in the transformative power of kindness. His writings are honest and moving. Became a catchphrase for people who thought that every act of kindness, no matter how tiny, had the capacity to bring about change. Lives as the community came together and the rehabilitation effort proceeded. Centered on the tale of Hope and her sick mother, the narrative developed into a more comprehensive analysis of empathy and the once devastating encounters. Transformational potential of providing care for the weak had grown into a representation of hope, a pledge that love and compassion may endure despite terrible injustice. Potentially illuminate the path to healing as Jack carried out his meticulous attempts to treat Spirit's injury using a number of nuanced clues started to arise that suggested a startling reality hidden beneath the surface of the already heartbreaking rescue story. Jack discovered the shredded pendant and intentional claw marks in the late afternoon while re-examining the location. He noticed something strange on a little, overgrown path close to a fallen log, a tiny glinting object that is partially hidden by a layer of wet leaves. Look was consistent with a small metallic piece that shone even in the natural woodland debris. Jack was fascinated by the canopy's diffused light and attentively investigated the object, discovered what appeared to be a piece of a sophisticated tracking device. The item was sleek, with markings on its surface, with a string of digits and a little emblem that alluded to superior technology. This revelation sent a shockwave across. The idea that he was a tracking gadget in a wild animal was both unbelievable and, if this had been purposefully implanted, Jack's thoughts would have been racing with alarm and dread. Device into Spirit, the painstaking detail of the wound on Spirit's side, and, with the accurate claw marks, it abruptly assumed a new, terrifying dimension. Wasn't just a coincidence or the outcome of a chance run-in with a predator. It seemed that Spirit was in pain. May have been planned. The notion that a human hand had purposefully meddled with a wild animal was a revelation that broke the illusion of natural misfortune he had clung to, determined to find the whole truth anyway. Jack made the decision to go back down the path where he had discovered the piece of the tracking device with Spirit, continuing to follow him feebly, a silent testament to his suffering. Jack set off on a cautious expedition more into his torch beam pierced the darkness in the woodland, illuminating a small path that he hadn't previously observed the trail's faint underbrush disruptions, and he followed the lingering smell of machinery to a remote area that seemed almost out of place among the old, pristine wilderness in the middle of the clearing, with a line of abandoned tools strewn about, including little portable. It was evident that there were electronic gadget fragments, and even ripped cloth pieces that appear to be purposefully concealed, that this was not a chance occurrence. Someone had been here, utilizing contemporary technology to monitor or perhaps control local wildlife, since the consequences were astounding in Jack's previous. The notion that Spirit's wounds were only the result of nature's ruthlessness was disproved by the data, suggesting human meddling while he used his camera to capture the image. Jack's thoughts swirled with a mixture of. He remembered the pictures of its hurt eyes and the painstaking specifics of the claw scratches that now had a sinister new significance. Whoever was responsible had not only injured an already suffering species, but they also employed technology to keep an eye on or maybe influence the animal with this revelation, which is as terrifying as the puzzle's missing link that Jack was attempting to piece together in the meantime, as news of Jack's discovery started to circulate across a local investigative journalist with a reputation for being tough. After learning about the incident from Wildlife Crimes Reports, she made plans to meet Jack at the clearing the next day where he discussed his research and growing concerns that Spirit's injury was a component of a more comprehensive and well-planned plot. The curiosity of the journalist gave the probe more legitimacy, and soon after, more evidence began to. On the surface, witnesses saw odd, unmarked cars and faces they didn't recognize, close to the edge of the forest, and multiple local animal welfare organizations verified comparable incidents of intentional harm to other animals back at his camp that evening, while Jack sat by himself beneath the enormous. The image of the tracking device fragment glistened in his thoughts like a cold, hard rock, and he couldn't get it out of his head. He considered the irony that although the wilderness served as a reminder that cruelty might be planned and organized, is frequently seen as a place of natural cruelty, yet occasionally human cruelty is concealed beneath layers of. In a calm time, technology and secrecy caused the most severe injuries. Determination, Jack started planning his next course of action after vowing he would not allow Spirit's pain to go unanswered. He gathered more evidence, contacting wildlife specialists for a thorough examination of the monitoring device and establishing connection with. In order to prevent this evidence from being written off as an oddity, local law enforcement injury could be a component of a large, intentional network of exploitation, changed his goal from one of rescue to a full-scale campaign against wildlife abuse. This surprising development of a wounded wolf had been equipped with a tracking device completely changed the game, revealing not only the potential that Spirit suffering was not a singular incident. Rather, it exposed a sinister undercurrent of exploitation driven by technology that, with the stakes higher than ever and the evidence growing, the integrity of the natural world was in danger. The urgency of Jack's journey promised to reveal hidden truths and deliver long overdue justice to the susceptible in the days after Jack's shocking discovery of the concealed equipment and the tracking device fragment. The environment of investigation and emotion surrounding Spirit's case further deepened the revelation that someone had purposefully tampered with a wounded wolf, not only disprove Jack's earlier theories regarding natural disaster, but it also shocked the local population by bringing to light the notion that many were left reeling and forced to reevaluate what it meant to live as a result of the evil disguised in technology. Back at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, the atmosphere was one of a world where brutality could be so well planned. Was solemn but resolute, Dr. Tura, the center's chief veterinary, looked Spirit's wound again, this time with a fresh sense of urgency, the intentionality of the harm, and the unexpected. The focus of treatment had changed from normal care to a cautious, almost forensic scrutiny due to technology evidence. She advised her team to exercise caution because this isn't just about bandaging a wound. It's about realizing the severity of the abuse. Her remarks struck a profound chord with the carers who were now witness to their efforts as a component of a greater effort to identify and reveal a sinister undercurrent that permeates the local. Reactions to the community's exploitation of wildlife were evenly split. At a number of town hall meetings, local animal welfare advocates and kind-hearted residents expressed their indignation with passionate. In addition to being cruel to a single animal, speakers condemned the intentional harm done to Spirit as this is an absurd symptom of a larger system that viewed nature as a resource to be controlled. And protester exclaimed, "What does it do if someone can use technology to monitor and harm a creature in the wild?" Speak about our culture's reverence for life. Their irate and heartbroken words inspired many to call for quick and firm action against the guilty, but there were equally voices calling for prudence and systematic. A tiny number of local officials who were worried that making snap judgments could endanger the collection of indisputable proof necessitated a methodical approach. We must allow One council member stated that although the evidence is concerning, we must make sure, before we take any legal or punitive action in this dispute, our activities are supported by thorough, verifiable evidence. Between swift vengeance and a methodical investigation only grew the internal strife of the society and prepared the ground for a more extensive and intricate inquiry. Jack sensed the weight of the disclosures profoundly. The tracking device's finding had changed his goal from one of his early compassion for Spirit had grown into a fight for justice, became a fierce need to reveal the intentional brutality causing the harm late at night when seated in Jack would set up a makeshift camp close to the clearing, go through the pictures, jot down notes in his diary, and play back He was plagued by visions of the same claw marks and the ripped jewelry. Detail a clear reminder that the exploitation was planned and systematic. It's not arbitrary, as he frequently whispered to himself that it's a message, and his will to learn more strengthened as each second when Jack spoke with local law enforcement and informed wildlife of his findings. Expertise. He started to see a trend in the covertly revealed former workers of the suspected rich, contacted to report similar instances of intentional injury to other animals. Their accounts presented a sobering image of a system of exploitation concealed under an appearance of wealth and philanthropy. These revelations sparked a growing sense of panic as well as public indignation. Jack suffered a severe personal toll from individuals who had long believed in the integrity of local power institutions. A lone hiker who took comfort in the uncaring wilderness, he now had the weight of duty not just for Spirit's healing, but also for the larger struggle against cruelty in humankind. He remarked in a close acquaintance in private, "I've always thought nature was harsh. I can't allow this injustice to remain unresolved this raw, though, because I never thought that human hands could be much more terrible." Vulnerability made his experience much more relatable and inspired support from a variety of community sources, including in the online community, where conversations regarding Spirit's case had already generated a wave of support. Following Jack's discovery tweets with hashtags like Justice for All, the tone changed. Spirit and exposes the abuse users started to share similar experiences and demand more openness and responsibility that the enthusiasm of the online community gave Jack, with encouragement and a renewed feeling of purpose strengthening his determination to complete the probe. Bitter and, in the middle of these conflicting responses, the wounded wolf itself became a living representation of both the brittleness of nature and its incredible fortitude each time Spirit hobbled. Moving ahead with a newfound resolve, it acted as a silent condemnation of the brutality he endured from many of his struggles, served as a mirror reflecting the structural shortcomings of a society that frequently translated into a personal tragedy, ignoring exploitation. So, as the inquiry progressed and the community struggled with opposing viewpoints, Jack's journey came to represent a greater struggle, a battle to hold influential people responsible and to bring some justice and compassion back to the world. The weight of every new discovery and every emotional outburst left scar by neglect. Each piece of evidence gathered strengthened the resolve of those supporting him in the conflict between. The ultimate meeting was set up because both visceral outrage and meticulous investigation had reached a critical point. As Jack and Officer Ryan investigate the cause of Spirit's intentional harm, new plot lines start to emerge. Each one's research added depth and urgency to the drama that was developing, which had started off as one sad instance of a wounded wolf begging for assistance has started to suggest a wider system of abuse and even possible concealments involving human intervention in the wild. One of the first surprising events occurred when Ms. Carla T., a local wildlife technician, contacted Officer Ryan. Carla, who has been keeping an eye on wildlife in the area for a number of years, and she stated that she had observed an odd trend where a number of animals in the surrounding areas displayed comparable, precisely caused injuries in. According to her research, these injuries weren't sporadic. Rather, they followed a pattern that indicated a consistent approach should be used. A technique that could suggest intentional manipulation. Carla's technological knowledge gave the mystery a scientific dimension, and her findings suggested a systemic issue that went much beyond Spirit's instance in the same. Local communities started to hear rumors about a reclusive person who was only known by a pseudonym on online discussion boards where this enigmatic person was suspected of several covert operations in the area, such as illicit wildlife operations, which some internet users claimed to. Others conjectured that he may be connected to Ed, while others saw glimmers of the shadow close to known poaching spots. To the purposeful application of technology, like the tracking device Jack had previously learned to operate or keep an eye on the area wildlife. These whispers created tension and implied that Spirit's wound might be a intentional action by someone with broad effect, as opposed to a singular occurrence that also happened locally. Ms. Marlowe, an investigative journalist, started writing a number of pieces about, although her report's initial focus was on more general wildlife exploitation in the area. Soon, trends focused on Spirit's case as a particularly heinous instance of intentional brutality in interviews with a number of former workers of a well-known local. A businessman who presented himself as a philanthropist suggested that he had a history of utilizing cutting-edge technologies and brutal techniques to subdue or mute animals, and even humans thought too. Spirit was linked to unprofitable Marlowe's publications that included anonymous testimonies and confidential internal memos. Her findings provided a crucial link between a particular injury and a broader pattern of exploitation. Harsh viewpoint that inspired community leaders and local activists to call for an exhaustive. The Spirit story was having a profound impact on local rescue efforts within the field of animal welfare. Already touched by the graphic depictions of the wounded wolf's agony, volunteers started to see similarities in other situations. There have been accounts of other animals receiving comparable, carefully placed wounds. Putting forth a purposeful, systematic cause, seasoned volunteer, called David from the regional shelter, described how Chant had hardly before witnessed such uniformity in injuries in his years of duty. New information not only supported the idea that Spirit's suffering was premeditated, but it also posed serious. As these subplots developed, Jack himself began to wonder about the degree of the cruelty in the area. Growing more and more alone due to the growing revelations, His evenings used to be spent hiking alone and engaging in personal reflections evolved into a number of painstaking field studies outfitted with a digital. Jack used a GPS device, a camera, and a notebook to trace spirit steps back along trails where every new set of footprints and every new scrape had been used to record minor clues. The purpose of documenting a tree trunk was to identify the individual or group responsible for the intentional attacks. These investigations started to uncover a possible pattern. The injuries and disruptions appear to cluster close to particular, infrequently frequented woodland areas where there were rumors of unlawful behavior. Local community meetings, which were already a battlefield of opposing viewpoints, became even more urgent as these. At a town hall meeting, passionate voices fought over subplots on whether was the intentional injury to spirit a random act of cruelty or a component of a larger, well-planned scheme by influential people. One activist said that if we disregard these trends, corrupt people would continue to exist. We are silently allowing our wildlife and community to be exploited, despite a cautious council member's insistence that they, prior to implementing harsh actions in this debate, obtain indisputable evidence, highlighted the widening gap in the community between the urge for fast, emotionally motivated punishment and for a thorough, meticulous online study. The story was provoking. Conversations on social media posts with hashtags such as Dose and Hookah's Save Spirit. People started sharing personal stories about the cruelty, which started a trend locally. Tales of abused wildlife and alleged illicit activity in the region. In addition to raising awareness, these online discussions put pressure on local authorities to adopt the new. Moreover, the notion that spirit suffering was a microcosm inspired a lot of community members of a far more serious problem: systemic exploitation concealed beneath a facade of riches and power. And an unexpected turn of events occurred when a local historian discovered historical documents that described comparable occurrences from decades earlier. According to archived municipal files and newspaper clippings, there were reports of intentional harm done to wildlife during a time when a wealthy local tycoon was linked to. These historical records offered a terrifying backdrop for the exploitation of the illegal animal trafficking industry. Although wild was not a recent occurrence, individuals looking to regulate and make money have revisited it over time. Historical context strengthened the evidence from the present that the brutality of spirits harm was part of a long-standing, albeit unspoken custom. So as Jack joins Officer Ryan and the community collected every available information, including eyewitness accounts and technological clues, too. Through historical documents and anonymous internet communications, the story of spirit suffering started to take shape. Tapestry of systematic cruelty and human exploitation. The intersection of these subplots highlighted a critical demand for justice and an appeal for the community to face the sinister side of human behavior that has long been hidden in the shadows of power and riches. In the weeks shortly after Jack found evidence indicating intentional human intervention into spirit's harm, the inquiry becomes more intimate and emotionally charged. Jack, a charged dimension, was torn between the brittle beauty of human wickedness and the bare harshness of the tenacity of nature's attention that not only called into question his rescue mission, but it had him face the boundaries of his own compassion. Late one night, while Jack sat by himself in his create a temporary camp in the middle of the forest, where the sounds of nightlife blend with the gentle patter of rain on his tent, thought about the unsettling proof he had collected, the exact claw marks on the floor, the ripped piece of cloth that suggested intentional disregard, and the remains of a tracking device all suggested a methodical act of. As Jack scrawled his thoughts in his worn journal, he couldn't help but engage in cruelty that went far beyond a chance incident, but experience a strong sense of obligation due to the pictures of ghosts' agonized gaze and the deliberate character of the wound plagued him, making it difficult to distinguish between the willful evil of humans and the indiscriminate cruelty of nature. Activities, the responses of those around him, including local wildlife specialists, exacerbated this internal struggle. Had at first handled Spirit's case as a standard rescue, started to show amazement and incredulity at the prospect of Intentional human intervention. Dr. Rivera, an experienced vet at the wildlife. Jack was told by a rehabilitation center during one of their private conversations. In the outdoors, I've seen a lot of injuries, but none so specific that it seems like someone intended to utilize the animal as porn or perhaps to convey a message. Her calm remarks resonated on a deeper level, and Jack reinforced his increasing awareness that this was not a singular instance of negligence. While community members who had, hearing about the investigation's progress, they were caught between compassion for the suffering animal and a cynical. Years of observing people's lack of interest at a local town hall led to skepticism. Voices fought violently at the discussion, with one passionate speaker arguing that if people were capable of such deliberate violence, then all innocent creatures could be a danger. Don't only think about spirit, she sobbed. It's about all the animals that have ever been taken advantage of by people who view nature as nothing more than a resource. Others warned that feelings shouldn't take precedence over facts when the proof is troubling. We need to continue to be impartial in these discussions as local officials. Mirrored Jack's internal conflict, which was divided between the urge to control his emotions and the need to follow the hard evidence. As Jack conducts additional research, he started to realize that the recollections of his early years were deeply entwined with his own personal past when the hardship that Spirit was going through came to him painfully clearly after he had previously felt abandoned and misunderstood. In a rare moment of weakness, Jack confided in a close friend about persevering, which seemed to reflect his own inner struggles. "Friend, I never thought that seeing such brutality could make me feel long buried here. It seems as though the anguish of the spirit is reminding me that no one, not even in this confession, made in the calm of a late night, should cause the wild to suffer in silence." A late-night phone conversation strengthened his dedication to the cause and fueled his determination to reveal the sinister undertones behind the intentional harm in the digital sphere. The case had sparked a lot of discussion. Hashtags such as "Your Justice for Spirit" on social networking sites and reveal the cruelty started to gain popularity locally as people shared their own accounts of animal abuse and casting doubt on the morality of those in authority. While many people felt helpless in the others cautioned against allowing the digital frenzy to obscure the necessity of thorough investigation. Jack read these articles through many restless nights, feeling encouraged by the support and being weighed down by the unfiltered feelings that seeped into each comment. The internet conversation, filled with both commendation and vital, highlighted how divisive the topic was and how it went right to the heart of how society viewed life. Whether the strain also extended to the practical components of the situation, whether it was human or animal. Jack faced opposition from others when coordinating the inquiry with local law enforcement and Officer Ryan. Authorities who were hesitant to pursue a case that implicated powerful community members. One officer during a highly charged discussion mentioned that even while the evidence is upsetting, we must make sure we follow the procedures, that our activities are evaluated. And this insistence on following protocol just made Jack feel more frustrated. That the genuine voice of the afflicted animal spirit's fervent appeal was lost in the quest for bureaucratic correctness. For assistance was being overshadowed by red tape and regulatory requirements trapped between these opposing worlds, the unfiltered emotional expression of a distressed population and the icy, calculated expectations. Despite legal and procedural norms, Jack started to feel as though he had lost his purpose. His goal was to save a sick animal, but it could have evolved into a much more ambitious pursuit of institutional justice. With responsibility, the insight was both liberating and immobilizing. With each new piece of evidence, each expert discussion, and each contentious online debate emphasized the fact that the exploitation of the weak was a systematic issue that required attention rather than a singular occurrence. On several levels, Jack's journal served as a lifeline during these turbulent times, a storehouse for his ideas, anxieties, aspirations, and the growing determination that drove him to take action. He wrote about the nature's paradox, how the wild, which is frequently viewed as cruel and uncaring, may serve as a backdrop for acts of brutality committed by people, but how that same wilderness might potentially provide a way to redemption if one had the guts to look for the truth. His remarks were unvarnished and unadulterated, evidence of the internal conflict he was having between the urge to just give quick assistance to spirit and the necessity of revealing the larger system of exploitation that had caused such intentional harm in the. Amidst these intricate exchanges and emotional quandaries, one reality became abundantly clear: the fight for spirit was about opposing a system that permitted cruelty to flourish unchecked, not just about protecting one animal. Jack's determination became stronger, and he promised to complete the probe at all costs. Every action he made was driven by the belief that no life should be seen as expendable and that the agonizing wounds of human cruelty should only be restored by an unwavering quest for justice. As the inquiry progressed, Jack was on the verge of a last confrontation as the growing evidence of intentional human cruelty became indisputable. Conflict that could determine spirit's destiny and even the community's attitude towards wildlife. Preserve the findings from the tracking device, the painstaking claw marks, and the ripped pieces of jewelry. These all pointed to the terrifying realization that spirit's injury was more than just a case of bad luck, of nature, but a deliberate act of cruelty, and now it was time to face the perpetrators and make a decision. One soggy, cloudy afternoon during justice, Jack planned a secret meeting with Officer Ryan, local wildlife specialists, and animal welfare organization representatives who had been keeping a close eye on the case. They assembled in a remote clearing close to the forest's edge, the exact location where, when the unsettling evidence was initially found, the air was tense as the group presented their discoveries on a worn wooden table. Images, recordings, and Jack's speech was filled with a mixture of the meticulous field notes that were laid out in an unbreakable mosaic of evidence. Of determination and grief pierced the quiet, marking each piece of evidence we've gathered supports our suspicion that spirit was purposefully hurt. This wasn't a spontaneous incident. It was an action intended to convey a message, to take advantage of and manage the wild for profit. His remarks were greeted by nods of agreement and grim expressions from Officer Ryan, who changed from the probe gained emotional intensity from the sympathetic advocate and the dispassionate law enforcement. And we cannot let unchecked cruelty is not limited to spirit. It affects everyone. We have an obligation to reveal this mistreatment of this weaker species in these woods and guarantee accountability at that point. The discussion unexpectedly turned into a local investigation. Mark Rivera, a journalist who had been following such occurrences in the area, brought a heavy envelope of papers to the clearing, and using a steady hand, he opened it to disclose internal memos, private statements, and financial documents that implicate a well-known local businessman with a polished public image. However, these documents reveal a history of dark exploitation, as Mark described. His tone was quiet but firm. This isn't a singular occurrence. There is a network, horrific exploitation that has been going on for years, employing cutting-edge technology and brutal techniques to endanger both people and wildlife. The revelation caused a chain reaction of. The group was shocked when the information revealed a scathing picture of the businessman whose identity had been linked to charity was actually linked to a number of intentional acts of cruelty directed at animals in the wild. According to records, his operations had monitored and controlled using tracking devices similar to the one on Spear. The group was energized by the damning evidence of using animals for profit, as Jack saw that their battle was not only to save Spirit, but also to overthrow a system that treated. In the contentious debates that ensued, the group discussed what to do next, with some members arguing that life is expendable. Driven by raw emotion, a public uproar demanding swift legal action was launched, which would force the businessman to. He contended that in order to uphold justice and make it abundantly evident that exploitation would not be accepted, we needed fervent activists. More innocent lives will be lost if we do nothing today. Others warned that although retaliation was required for profit, a systematic, to make sure that all of the material was recorded, independent research was essential, and that during the discussion, The pursuit of truth was untarnished by any false accusations. Officer Ryan, whose voice had evolved into a source of emotional motivation, as well as a foundation of authority, got up and, speaking to the gathered group, he stated forcefully that we must have two goals: to hold those in charge accountable and restore faith in our community's capacity to safeguard the weak. We will file. Using the substantial information we have acquired, we will file legal complaints with the local authorities and create an independent task group to invest in order to measure the entire scope of these unethical behaviors. Words broke through the emotional chaos and provided a clear route forward, which the group gradually started to follow. Agreement, a strategy was created, and the evidence would be given to a group of legal and wildlife specialists. And a public statement would be released to inform the public about the abuse's systemic nature. A specialized team would be established to continue collecting testimonies and keeping an eye out for any more indications of. Despite the probable hazards and political fallout, the choice to intentionally cause cruelty in the forest was accepted with a feeling of serious resolve. Every group member understood that this was not just a struggle for spirit's justice, while against a larger system that devalued. A thick stillness descended across the area as the meeting came to an end. In that silence, the storm outside had started to lessen, and the first signs of a cloud break indicated a new day. Jack took a minute to contemplate as he glanced around at his teammates, Officer Ryan and Mark. Rivera saw the wildlife specialists and campaigners and had a wave of group. Resolve. They were bound together by the conviction that the abuse done to spirit was intolerable and that each and every living being deserved respect and safety. And with the proof in hand and a well-defined strategy in place, the team committed to proceed with unyielding resolve. Jack, who is full of both sorrow and for what was accomplished and for what was proclaimed today, we stand not only for spirit but also for. Our work has only just begun, but we will continue until justice is served for every life that has been destroyed by exploitation that wins out in that decisive moment when the wind died down and the clearing was covered in. The community's demand for justice turned into an unbreakable pledge under the gentle glimmer of the dawn, and the task force was prepared to start a relentless search for the truth in order to reveal the covert network of cruelty that had plagued their wilderness for an excessive amount of time following the spectacular encounter and the startling disclosures of spirits' intentional harm. New storylines started to emerge, broadening the focus of the inquiry and strengthening the ties between those participating in what began as a solo rescue. The mission has transformed into a community-wide pursuit of justice and the truth that linked local wildlife advocates and Jack D. Officer Ryan with people whose lives have been impacted by comparable. When Jack got a call from a local university professor, one of the first new strands to emerge was about acts of cruelty. Dr. Evelyn Torres, a specialist in environmental ethics and animal behavior. Torres had been keeping a close eye on the case via local news broadcasts and social media, fascinated by the potentiality that spirits damage could not be a singular occurrence, but rather a component of a larger trend of. Subsequently, she presented data at a local research center, and she volunteered to work with Jack on her personal field research, which revealed an alarming increase in intentionally caused injuries among a number of. There is a pattern among the wildlife species in the area, which she described, implies that these injuries may be related to intentional human action rather than being the result of random occurrences. Jack's suspicions gained validity from the scientific viewpoint, which also assisted in bridging the gap between raw feeling and empirical data. At the same time, regional animal welfare groups started to join the inquiry. Sarah, a committed volunteer who has previously recorded, Jack received additional photos and field notes from other suspicious wildlife injury cases. She had been monitoring complaints from worried locals who stated that additional animals in the region displayed. Jack and Sarah compared their data and discovered startling parallels between the oddly patented wounds. Evidence suggested a concerted attempt to kill weaker animals. Their cooperation not only enhanced the evidence while simultaneously creating a feeling of unity among those dedicated to bringing to light the darker The drama that is developing is further complicated by the side of wildlife exploitation. A number of unidentified social media posts began to circulate using the hashtag. These posts included grainy images, and I saw descriptions of silent suffering, mysterious communications detailing experiences with wounded wildlife in various regions of the area. One post in Jack was particularly interested in one that described a nearly comparable situation involving a deer with exact, unnaturally caused injuries. And the fact that these reports kept coming back indicated that spirit situation was a part of a systemic problem instead of a singular occurrence. As these online threads expanded, online forums started collaborating with regional activists and holding conversations against the abuse of. In the midst of the digital buzz, wildlife became a powerful movement in and of itself. A surprising figure appeared: Mr. Redmond, a recluse local historian renowned for his encyclopedic understanding of the history of the area. Mr. Redmond has devoted decades to gathering documents and oral narratives of the. When he heard about spirit situation, he contacted Jack with a treasure from the area's wildlife and local legends. Several of our oral documents, including ancient newspaper articles and 1970s municipal reports, described such incidents of animal abuse purportedly connected to infamous local tycoon, Mr. Redmond, outlined how there had been a number of unresolved cases involving intentional harm to wildlife, all of which were subtly suppressed by those in authority. Gave background information for the current study, indicating that the exploitation of the wild has profound. Officer Ryan discovered that the region has systemic roots in its past. At the same time, once Enforcer Ryan's empathy had increased, he became more and more engrossed in the case's emotional undertones. As he observed the spirit's slow recuperation and the growing proof of intentional injury late at night, he admitted in talks with his partner that the case had made him reevaluate his own convictions over the. Every time I see spirits, there is a balance between law enforcement and humanitarian assistance. Dedicated eyes serve as a reminder that our responsibility extends beyond upholding the law to include protecting those who are unable to defend themselves. He claimed that Ryan's changing viewpoints started to affect his co-workers as well, affecting a number of cops, declaring a renewed will to assist the probe outside of their customary procedures. In the middle of these changes, community gatherings became more animated. At one such, residents hotly debated the ramifications of the new evidence during a gathering organized at the local community center. Intense debates range from demands for prompt legal action against the exploitation's perpetrators to, please, according to prominent local campaigner Ms. Johnson, there should be a more comprehensive overhaul of wildlife preservation laws. In addition to holding the offenders responsible, the society must put long-term policies in place to protect the environment from additional harm. It's not simply about one injured. She said that the purpose of these sessions was to change how we regard and safeguard all life in our surroundings. A melting pot for different viewpoints from the scientific analyses that Dr. Historical perspectives from Torres and Mr. Redmond on the grassroots protest expressed. Local activists' varied perspectives enhanced the inquiry and promoted a multidisciplinary approach that weighed evidence against emotion as more people from all backgrounds shared their expertise and experiences. The spirit case became a cry for the fight against systematic brutality and a symbol of community to recover its duty to the environment despite growing tensions. Jack and his partners were adamant about recording every nuance that their field visits into the forest became. Every expedition, finding fresh clues such as odd trends in the terrain or before unseen tree markings. These laborious efforts do not only broaden the body of evidence, but also strengthen the team members' interpersonal ties, creating trusting relationships with mutual dedication. Hence the arising subplots from the scientific discoveries of Sarah's painstaking documenting of Dr. Torres' historical revelations. Together, Mr. Redmond and the passionate discussions on community forums create a intricate story. Spirit pain was no longer a singular incident, but rather a component of the convergence of these disparate strands increased the urgency of a larger tapestry of intentional exploitation, of the inquiry laying the groundwork for a last, decisive conflict with As the inquiry went on and additional proof of intentional exploitation surfaced, individuals in charge, after starting as a personal quest to save an injured wolf, the stress around Spirit's situation reached an intolerable peak, had now developed into a full-fledged conflict against a covert cruelty, a network. Society that had taken advantage of the weak in the name of profit and advancement. The increasing chorus of scientific, historical narratives and grassroots protests have brought together a variety of groups throughout the community, but it also revealed stark differences between those calling for swift vengeance and those who insist on a methodical and cautious investigation in a town that has been specially convened. Furious arguments that reverberated off the walls during a full assembly in the local community center's auditorium. Local activists, wildlife specialists, law enforcement officers, and even some skeptics convened to talk about the unsettling results that Dr. Torres, a professor at a university who had painstakingly recorded patterns of odd injuries in the local wildlife, displayed her information with measured authority, and the data shows a troubling consistency, she said, quiet but firm voice implying that Spirit's wounds and other wounds we've seen in other animals are not coincidental events. Rather, they are a component of a plan. Her remarks struck a chord with many, but they also stoked public ire. Among the passionate speakers was M. Johnson, a local activist, whose eyes brimmed with tears as she described her personal tragedy as a result of an animal. Neglect is a whole system that views life as expendable. It's not just about one wolf, she said. We must remain united and insist that those in charge be held accountable. Her request was warmly received from a segment of the public that had long felt excluded due to the disregard of influential elites, but not everyone was as enthusiastic as several reasonable community members and a group of local politicians cautioned. Even though the evidence was extremely concerning, any response had to be carefully investigation. We must make sure that our decisions are supported by indisputable facts. A council member argued in a calm and careful haste to make a decision without thorough documentation could have unforeseen effects. There was a noticeable division in the room due to procedural caution, a conflict between fresh. With these opposing viewpoints, an anonymous email highlights the need for systematic legal action as well as emotional outrage. The signed Hope's Keeper's Crypt was broadcast on the town hall public speaker system. Message cutting through the contentious discussion. When authority obscures brutality, the truth will not be concealed. A grainy picture of the route where darkness meets light and justice is revealed was included with the letter. Spirit close to a secluded area of the woodland where strange occurrences have been before noted this spooky. The letter gave the conversation a fresh sense of urgency by implying that the exploitation was more widespread than anyone had previously thought. Notorious police officer Ryan, who had changed from a rigidly law-abiding officer to a sympathetic supporter of his metamorphosis, had been among the most vulnerable for Rose to talk about. Amazing details of the saga's development, and his voice now held the weight of hard empathy. I've witnessed the suffering. Despite the emotional turbulence on his face, he said in Spirit's eyes, his voice firm, and I think that the pain we are seeing is a sign of a much more pernicious support structure that utilizes cruelty as an instrument for control, and we must take action to both save this creature and destroy the. His remarks, praise on the defenseless, resonated deeply with the audience, bridging the divide between. As the argument heated, Jack's moral obligation and scientific caution. After thorough investigations revealed that the harm was intentional, he provided his final compilation of pictures showing the same claw scratches on the ripped piece of a high-tech. Before the community, a tracking gadget and thorough maps identifying the odd footprints were presented. Jack said that the evidence demonstrated intentional brutality, which was not a chance occurrence, but a deliberate abuse, and we have an obligation to reveal this network and safeguard each life, putting his impassioned statement full of unadulterated resolve at risk. Even the most doubtful participants realized how serious the situation was when the room collapsed into a thick stillness as the full weight of the facts descended upon all those in attendance. The anonymous tip, the Scientific analyses and verified statements from former employees came to an unquestionable conclusion. Conclusion: the intentional harm done to Spirit was a component of a larger systematic pattern of exploitation carried out by those in positions of authority under the guise of charity that the community currently had to decide whether to permit this darkness to persist unchecked or arrange a coordinated reaction that would call for responsibility and structural reform. In the closing minutes of the meeting, agreement started to form and a motion to establish an investigating task force comprising legal professionals and wildlife experts, law enforcement officers with empathy, like Officer Ryan, and community activists. And Jack, this group would be tasked with following up on each lead, recording every detail, and eventually taking those accountable to justice. This decision was not taken lightly. Rather, it was a sincere commitment to defend each and every living being that had been taken advantage of and to reestablish the fragile equilibrium between nature and humans. As the meeting was adjourned, the atmosphere outside was charged with excitement. The storm had subsided to a steady rain, and the promise of a fresh start was alluded to by the first light of dawn in that moment of collective decision. Community pledged that the demand for justice was heard in each heartbreaking cry and passionate appeal in the hall would not remain unanswered as the inquiry into Spirit's intentional. The community was on the verge of a final clash when the injury reached its climax. When every bit of evidence, every hushed testimony, and every heartfelt scream came together to form a single, with the forest and a slate-gray sky, the unwavering demand for justice. Jack, Officer Ryan, and his collaborators were assembled in the area that had turned into the area dominated by an old oak whose gnarled limbs extended towards them, served as the symbolic focal point of their conflict. This final battle took place against the backdrop of the gloomy heavens. All of the gathered pieces of evidence were presented to them on a worn wooden table, together with high-resolution photos of the ripped piece of a sophisticated tracking gadget, the exact claw prints carved into the soft earth, and the intricate maps showing areas of the forest with unusual activity. Each item served as evidence of Spirit's deliberate abuse that could no longer be written off as chance. Misfortune. Jack moved onwards, his voice steady but full of unfiltered emotion, and each bit of. He stated that Spirit's injuries wasn't an accident, and this proof supports our first suspicions. Nature. It was a purposeful act of exploitation intended to convey a message. We now know that a person or group of people has been intentionally damaging our wildlife in order to make money and control. His remarks struck a chord with the gathered crowd, eliciting murmurs and nods of consensus from specialists on wildlife, community activists, and sympathetic law officers like Ryan, whose transformation from a disinterested enforcer to, beside Jack, a kind advocate who had come to represent the entire probe, we cannot let. He stated in a resolute tone that this case isn't only about the cruelty that goes unpunished, about a single injured animal. It's about tearing down a system that views life as expendable, and it is our responsibility to reveal this. Exploitation makes the offenders responsible and guarantees that no other animal experiences the same tragedy as him. Passionate appeal served as a link between the deep and the icy empirical data. Human indignation that had spread across the neighborhood at that time. A local, Mark Rivera, an investigative journalist, presented the final dossier, which was a compilation of internal documents, private statements from former workers in finance, documents that connected a network of illegal wildlife traders to the infamous local businesses. Mark's explanation of the events in this dossier demonstrates a history of methodical. The evidence of abuse and exploitation is not circumstantial. Rather, it is damning, examining a purposeful, well-planned effort to make money off of the suffering of weaker animals like Spirit. His voice quivered with restrained rage as he described how the businessman's charitable public persona concealed a vicious agenda. As the weight of Mark's revelations descended upon everyone, the atmosphere in the clearing became electrifying. Present, a contentious discussion broke out within the gathering, with some activists calling for urgent legal action against the businessman, demanding swift punishment to discourage others from being as careless, claimed that in order to make sure that every aspect of this systemic issue was examined. Prior to the implementation of any disciplinary measures, exploitation was extensively documented. Following lengthy, passionate discussions, a heated argument resulted in an agreement. The task force that was put together, which included Jack Officer Ryan Mark Rivera Wildlife, community activists, and specialists agreed on a two-pronged strategy. They would use the substantial evidence they had acquired to submit official legal complaints while also starting an independent research to determine the entire extent of the network's exploitation. This integrated approach was intended to not only hold the guilty persons accountable, but also to establish a long-lasting framework for holding those in positions of authority accountable and safeguarding endangered fauna. Officer Ryan gave a last speech to the group after the choice was reached, reaffirming our unity and our dedication to justice, said, his voice resounding with resolve. Today we take the initial phase of tearing down a system that has permitted cruelty to flourish through our efforts. We'll be strict, unyielding, and compassionate. Our guiding light spirits, suffering won't be in. Despite his conceit, a collective resolute murmur greeted his comments, promising that the struggle for justice had indeed started as the gathering came to an end, and everyone scattered into the chilly, rain-soaked. Jack waited in the darkness, each person bearing the burden of the choice and the promise of a more sympathetic future. He was silently thinking as he looked out over the clearing at the old oak and the evidence that was spread out in front of him. The scope of their goal, which is to uncover hidden brutality and destroy corrupt structures, and to provide each life that had been treated as an virtually imperceptible ray of light, appeared in the final minutes before the gathering dispersed. With the proof in place, the looming clouds provide the symbolic promise of a fresh start. And a well-defined strategy in place, the community's determination remained unwavering, and the fight against institutionalized cruelty was now a common endeavor, and each person in attendance was aware that the path ahead would be difficult yet. Together, they pushed forth into the future with their collective strength and the remembrance of Spirit's silent call for justice. Uncertain dawn is prepared to face the shadows and reveal the truth as the autonomous task force sets. When they put their strategy into action, the community's climate changed from one of fierce conflict to one of resolve. In the days that followed that crucial encounter in the forest clearing, Jack, one Officer Ryan searched for solutions, and Mark Rivera and their supporters painstakingly assembled all of the information into an extensive report. Every picture of the intentional claw marks, every piece of fabric that has been shredded, and every piece of the monitoring device that has been broken was well planned. The proof was indisputable, and it was a stunning indictment of the covert network of. The town hall was the site of the exploitation that had caused Spirit to suffer such torment on the morning of the final encounter. Packed with a silent yet determined crowd, local authorities are currently under a lot of. Due to public pressure, the task force's findings were reviewed in a packed auditorium. At a press conference, local media, animal welfare advocates, and community residents pledged to reveal. Officer Ryan addressed the stage first to discuss the findings of the inquiry, and his voice once. After months of investigation, our coolness and detachment now carried the weight of strong commitment and profound empathy. Discovered a troubling trend of intentional cruelty that extends much beyond this one instance. He announced the evidence indicates that Spirit's injuries was the result of a planned act of exploitation rather than a tragic accident. Perpetrated by those with a polished public persona. Today, we stand together. We will not just demand accountability from individuals in charge, but also systemic change to safeguard our, as Ryan said, Mark Rivera, nature and our communities from such predation. Confidently on the stage to deliver the completed dossier, revealing the leaked internal memos, financial documents, and testimony linking the infamous local businessman to a network of illicit. These records from wildlife operations support our long-held suspicions. Mark declared in a tone full of restrained rage that this is not a singular instance, but rather a component of a larger intentional campaign to profit from the exploitation of nature and we now possess the means to expose this covert cruelty. The chamber was quiet as the discovery's weight descended, and a feeling of catharsis permeated the space, a collective sigh following months of local suffering and uncertainty. With their eyes sparkling, animal protection organizations who had planned vigils and protests in support of Spirit cheered gently. With cries of relief and hope, the evidence was shown to be a promise of renewal rather than just a demand for retribution. For the community, it was a sea change when decades of disregard could finally be addressed in the final. During the news conference, a well-known local attorney called Mr. Ellis served as a task force spokesperson, described the next actions we will take, including submitting formal complaints and initiating legal action against those implicated. He promised the audience, and will keep collaborating with community leaders and wildlife specialists to create measures to guarantee such exploitation never occurs. Once more, the goal of this project is to change our approach to punishment, not merely to punish the guilty. As the press conference came to an end, conservation and protection, there was a noticeable sense of commitment in the days that followed as local officials started in. A number of hearings and an independent investigation were planned to examine the implicated parties' behavior. The collective outrage of the businessman and his network resulted in the development of new regulations intended to protect wildlife, such as more stringent rules for the use of technology to monitor animals and harsher sanctions for intentional acts of cruelty by Jacka, whose journey began with a single act of kindness, became the focal point of a larger movement for justice, and he kept recording the inquiry. In his journal, he now writes, "We have a mixture of cautious optimism and somber reflection. Made the first firm move to stop the exploitation that has plagued the suffering of our wilderness spirit has not been unsuccessful in our pursuit of justice, as we are recovering not only his honor but the assurance that every life in danger should be protected and respected." In a moving farewell, Officer Ryan saw Spirit having treatment at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. His eyes were filled with appreciation as he saw the injured wolf gradually start to recover. Resolve, which, he whispered softly, marks the start of a new chapter. Chapter in which exploitation is defeated by compassion and cruelty is held accountable. The community, now more cohesive than before, welcomed the changes with newfound vigor. Using hashtags like Justice for Spirit and Renew the Wild and Local, social media was ablaze with hopeful comments. Newspapers included articles praising the strength of group effort, and a tangible feeling of rejuvenation started to grow as locals realized that their united front may open the door for a transformation and structural change that would pay tribute to each and every person taken advantage of by greed. We appreciate you joining us on this potent voyage of resilience, justice, transformation, the spirit tale, and the valiant efforts. If any members of our community have touched your heart, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and leave a comment. We encourage you to join us in the comment section below as we keep fighting for those who are unable to speak for themselves and strive for a society in which all lives are valued and safeguarded. Stay tuned for more motivational tales that highlight the deep relationships between people and the natural environment. Let's be the transformation that illuminates the deepest recesses.